Have you ever noticed how the harder you try to fix your life, the more broken it seems to become? You push, you strive, you follow every piece of advice, yet somehow you end up exactly where you started, or worse. You're not alone in this maddening cycle. Carl Jung, one of the greatest scholars of the human mind, understood something that most people spend their entire lives missing. He knew that our greatest enemy isn't the world around us. It's the part of ourselves we refuse to see. Right now, as you're listening to this, there's a voice in your head telling you that you need to do more, work harder, try a different strategy, push through the resistance. But what if that voice is the very thing keeping you trapped? What if the answer isn't doing more, but doing nothing at all? I know how that sounds. In a world that worships productivity and action, suggesting you do nothing feels like heresy. But stay with me, because what I'm about to share will change how you see everything. The truth is, you've been fighting a war against yourself. And you can't win a war when you don't even know who the enemy is. Jung called this enemy the shadow. It's the collection of all the parts of yourself that you've decided are unacceptable. The anger you're not supposed to feel, the selfishness you're not allowed to express, the laziness you've been taught to despise, the fear you pretend doesn't exist. Every time you tell yourself, "I'm not that kind of person," you're feeding your shadow. Every time you judge someone else for a quality you despise, you're seeing your own shadow reflected back at you. Ask yourself this. What bothers you most about other people? Is it their arrogance, their neediness, their lack of ambition, their selfishness? Write it down, look at it, because Jung discovered something that will make you uncomfortable. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves. That person you can't stand at work, the one who's always seeking attention, they're showing you the part of yourself that desperately wants to be seen, but that you've buried under layers of supposed humility. That friend who never seems to try hard enough. They're reflecting your own exhaustion, your own desire to stop pushing so hard, a desire you've labeled as weakness and shoved into the darkness. Your shadow isn't evil. It's just human. But when you deny it, when you pretend it doesn't exist, it grows stronger in the darkness. It starts running your life from behind the scenes. This is why nothing you do seems to work. You're trying to fix your life while ignoring half of who you are. It's like trying to drive a car while refusing to acknowledge that it has a reverse gear. You can push the gas pedal all you want, but if you're in reverse, you're going backwards. Every goal you set that you don't achieve, every relationship that falls apart, despite your best efforts, every time you find yourself in the same situation with a different person, these aren't coincidences, these are your shadow at work. But here's what Jung understood that changes everything. The shadow isn't your enemy, it's your teacher. The parts of yourself you've been running from contain the very power you need to transform your life. But first, you have to stop running. You have to be still. You have to do nothing. When you stop the constant motion, the endless planning and striving and doing, something remarkable happens. The noise quiets down, and in that silence you start to hear the voice you've been drowning out your entire life. It's the voice of your authentic self, the person you were before the world told you who you should be. But this voice often says things you don't want to hear. It tells you that you're tired of pretending to be strong all the time. It admits that you're angry about things you've been telling yourself don't matter. It confesses that you want things you've been taught to be ashamed of wanting. This is why most people never stop moving, because stillness forces you to face the truth about yourself. And the truth is often the opposite of who you think you are. You think you're generous, but the truth is you give because you're terrified of being seen as selfish. You think you're independent, but the truth is you avoid intimacy because you're afraid of being abandoned. You think you're ambitious, but the truth is you're driven by a fear of being ordinary. These aren't character flaws, they're human truths. But when you acknowledge them, when you stop pretending they don't exist, something shifts. The energy you've been using to suppress these parts of yourself suddenly becomes available for something else. The awareness you've been avoiding becomes the foundation for real change. Jung called this process individuation. It's the journey of becoming whole by integrating all parts of yourself, even the ones you don't like, especially the ones you don't like. But individuation can't happen while you're in constant motion. It requires stillness. It requires the courage to do nothing and face whatever comes up. Most people think doing nothing means giving up. But Jung understood that true doing nothing is the most courageous act of all, because it means facing yourself without the distraction of endless activity. When you finally stop running from your shadow, you discover something unexpected. The things you've been most afraid of about yourself are often connected to your greatest gifts. The anger you've been suppressing might be connected to your sense of justice. The selfishness you've been denying might be connected to your ability to set healthy boundaries. The laziness you've been fighting might be connected to your wisdom about what truly matters. But you can't access these gifts while you're still at war with the parts of yourself that carry them. This is why all your efforts to change have felt like pushing a boulder uphill. You've been trying to transform while rejecting fundamental parts of who you are. It's like trying to build a house while refusing to use half the materials. The moment you stop fighting your shadow and start listening to it, everything changes. The resistance that's been blocking your path dissolves. The patterns that have been repeating in your life begin to shift. The energy you've been wasting on internal warfare becomes available for creation. But this shift requires something that feels impossible in our action-obsessed culture. It requires you to trust that doing nothing can be more powerful than doing everything. Jung observed that the psyche has its own wisdom, its own timing, its own way of healing. But this natural process can't unfold while you're constantly interfering with it. It's like trying to let a wound heal while constantly picking at the scab. When you finally give your psyche permission to work without your interference, it begins to reorganize itself. Old patterns start to dissolve, new possibilities begin to emerge. But this process happens in its own time, in its own way. You can't force it. You can't schedule it. You can't optimize it. You can only allow it. And allowing requires the ultimate act of surrender. Doing nothing, not the kind of nothing that comes from depression or giving up. The kind of nothing that comes from trust. Trust that your psyche knows what it's doing. Trust that stillness contains its own form of action. Trust that sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is absolutely nothing at all. This is where most people get stuck. They understand the concept intellectually, but they can't bring themselves to actually stop. Because stopping means facing the shadow. And facing the shadow means discovering truths about yourself that you've spent your whole life avoiding. But here's what Jung knew that can change everything for you. Your shadow isn't hiding your weaknesses, it's hiding your power. The very things you've been most afraid of about yourself are often the keys to your liberation. But you can't access this power while you're still running from it. You have to be still. You have to listen. You have to do nothing and let your shadow speak. And when it does speak, when you finally hear what it's been trying to tell you all these years, you'll understand why nothing else has worked. You'll see why every strategy has failed, why every plan has fallen apart, why every effort has led you back to the same place. You've been trying to solve the puzzle with half the pieces missing. The pieces you threw away because you decided they didn't belong. But every piece belongs. every part of you has a purpose. Even the parts you hate, especially the parts you hate. When you finally stop running and start listening, when you finally do nothing and let your shadow emerge from the darkness, you'll discover something that changes everything. The person you've been trying to become already exists. They've been waiting in the shadows all along, waiting for you to stop fighting them and start embracing them, waiting for you to realize that your wholeness includes your brokenness, your light includes your darkness, your strength includes your weakness. And in that moment of recognition, in that instant of integration, the need to constantly do something dissolves, because you finally understand that you don't need to fix yourself. You need to find yourself, all of yourself. The shadow you've been running from isn't your enemy, it's your missing piece. And until you reclaim it, until you do nothing long enough to hear its voice, you'll keep running in circles, wondering why nothing ever changes. But everything is about to change. Because now you know the secret that Jung spent his life teaching, the secret that can set you free from the endless cycle of effort without results. Sometimes the most powerful action is no action at all. The most powerful action is no action at all. But why does your mind fight this truth so violently? Right now, as those words settle in, you can feel the resistance building. There's a voice screaming that this can't be right, that doing nothing is giving up, that you'll fall behind, lose ground, miss opportunities. That voice isn't your wisdom speaking, it's your unconscious terror. Jung understood that the human psyche has one primary job: survival, not thriving, not happiness, not fulfillment, just survival. And your unconscious mind has decided that constant motion equals safety.
Think about it. When did you first learn that you had to keep moving to be worthy of love? When did stillness become synonymous with laziness in your mind? When did doing nothing become your greatest fear? You learned it so young that you can't even remember learning it, but your unconscious remembers everything. Your unconscious mind is like a vast recording device that's been running since the moment you were born. Every experience, every emotion, every message about who you should be has been catalogued and filed away. And now, those recordings are running your life. This is why doing nothing feels so dangerous, because somewhere in that vast unconscious library is a recording that says, if you stop moving, you'll be abandoned. If you stop achieving, you'll be worthless. If you stop proving your value, you'll be forgotten. Jung called these unconscious patterns archetypes. They're universal themes that show up in every human story, in every culture, across all of time. The hero who must constantly prove their worth, the caretaker who must always be needed, the rebel who must always be fighting something. Which archetype has been running your life? Are you the hero, forever chasing the next mountain to climb, the next dragon to slay, the next way to prove you matter? Every time you achieve something, instead of satisfaction, you feel emptiness. Because the hero's job is never done. There's always another quest, another challenge, another way to prove your worth. Or maybe you're the caretaker, constantly fixing, helping, rescuing others. Your worth is tied to how much you're needed. The thought of doing nothing terrifies you, because if you're not solving someone's problems, who are you? Your unconscious has convinced you that your value lies in your usefulness. Perhaps you're the rebel, forever fighting against something. Authority, systems, expectations, even your own limitations. Your identity is built on resistance. The idea of surrendering, of doing nothing, feels like death to you. Because if you're not fighting, if you're not pushing against something, you don't know who you are. These aren't conscious choices. These are unconscious programs
that were installed in you before you had the ability to question them, and they've been running in the background of your life ever since, creating the very problems you're trying so hard to solve. The hero keeps chasing external validation, but never feels satisfied because the wound driving them is internal. The caretaker keeps rescuing others, but their own life falls apart because they're running from their own need to be cared for. The rebel keeps fighting but never finds peace because they're at war with themselves. This is the cruel irony of unconscious patterns. They create the very situations they're trying to prevent. The hero, terrified of being ordinary, pushes so hard to be extraordinary that they burn out and achieve nothing. The caretaker, afraid of being abandoned, becomes so needy and controlling that they drive people away. The rebel, scared of being controlled, becomes so defiant that they sabotage their own success. Your unconscious mind is trying to protect you, but it's using outdated information. It's operating from wounds and fears that were formed when you were 5 years old, using strategies that may have worked then but are destroying your life now. This is why all your conscious efforts to change keep failing. You're trying to override a system that's much more powerful than your willpower. You're trying to think your way out of patterns that were formed before you could think. Jung discovered that the unconscious mind speaks in symbols, not logic. It communicates through dreams, through the patterns that keep repeating in your life, through the people and situations that trigger you. But most people are too busy doing to listen to what their unconscious is trying to tell them. When you finally stop the constant motion, when you create space for stillness, your unconscious finally has a chance to communicate, and what it tells you will shock you. It will tell you that you've been running from the very thing you most need to face, that you've been seeking outside yourself what can only be found within, that you've been trying to solve problems that don't actually exist while ignoring the real problem entirely. The real problem isn't your circumstances. It's not your job, your relationships, your bank account, or your body. The real problem is that you're living someone else's life. Somewhere along the way, you absorbed messages about who you should be, what you should want, how you should live, and you've been trying to fit yourself into that mold ever since. But you were never meant to fit that mold. You were meant to break it. This is what Jung called individuation. It's the process of becoming who you actually are, not who you think you should be. But individuation is impossible while you're constantly doing, because doing keeps you focused on the external world, on meeting expectations, on fitting in. Individuation requires you to turn inward, to listen to your own voice instead of the voices of everyone else, to honor your own needs instead of the needs others have projected onto you, to trust your own wisdom instead of the wisdom the world has tried to impose on you.
But turning inward feels terrifying because it means facing the person you really are underneath all the doing, and that person might want different things than you think you should want. They might have needs you've been taught to be ashamed of. They might have desires that don't fit the image you've been trying to maintain. Your unconscious knows this. It knows that stillness leads to truth, and truth leads to change. And change feels like death to the part of you that's been trying to stay safe by staying the same. This is why your mind creates such elaborate resistance to doing nothing. It will give you 1,000 urgent tasks. It will remind you of all your responsibilities. It will flood you with anxiety about all the things that could go wrong if you stop moving. But these aren't real emergencies. They're unconscious strategies to keep you from the one thing that could actually set you free, facing yourself. Jung understood that the psyche has its own intelligence, its own way of healing, its own timing for growth. But this natural process can't unfold while you're constantly interfering with it.
It's like trying to let a seed grow while constantly digging it up to check on its progress. The seed knows how to grow. Your psyche knows how to heal, but both require the right conditions. And the primary condition is non-interference. When you finally stop trying to control the process, when you finally allow yourself to be still, something remarkable happens. The unconscious patterns that have been running your life begin to surface, not to torment you, but to be seen, to be acknowledged, to be integrated. This is where most people panic and start doing again. Because what surfaces isn't pretty. It's all the anger you've been suppressing, all the sadness you've been avoiding, all the fear you've been trying to outrun, all the parts of yourself you've been denying. But Jung discovered something revolutionary. These aren't obstacles to your growth. They're the raw material for your transformation. The anger you've been running from contains your power. The sadness you've been avoiding contains your compassion. The fear you've been fighting contains your wisdom. But you can't access these gifts while you're still at war with the emotions that carry them. This is what integration means. It doesn't mean getting rid of the parts of yourself you don't like. It means finding the gold hidden in what you've labeled as garbage. Your laziness isn't a character flaw. It's your soul's way of saying you need rest. Your selfishness isn't a moral failing. It's your psyche's way of protecting your boundaries. Your anger isn't a problem to be solved. It's energy that needs to be channeled. But you can't hear these messages while you're in constant motion. The voice of integration is quiet. It requires stillness to be heard. Most people are so afraid of what they'll find in the stillness that they never allow themselves to experience it. They fill every moment with activity, with noise, with distraction. But the very thing they're running from is the thing that could save them. In the stillness, you don't find emptiness, you find fullness. You don't find weakness. You find strength. You don't find your worst self. You find your truest self. But this true self doesn't look like what you expected. It's not the polished, perfect version you've been trying to become. It's messier than that. More complex. More human. Your true self contains contradictions. You can be strong and vulnerable simultaneously. You can be generous and self-protective at the same time. You can be confident and uncertain in the same moment. These aren't problems to be resolved. They're paradoxes to be embraced. Jung understood that psychological health isn't about eliminating contradictions. It's about learning to hold them in creative tension. It's about becoming large enough to contain all of who you are, without needing to choose sides. But this expansion of self-acceptance can only happen in stillness, because stillness is where you meet yourself without judgment, where you encounter yourself without trying to change anything, where you experience yourself without needing to fix anything. This is terrifying for a mind that's been trained to believe that you're only valuable when you're improving. But Jung discovered that the attempt to constantly improve yourself is actually what keeps you stuck. When you're always trying to become someone else, you never fully inhabit who you are. When you're always focused on your next level, you never appreciate your current level. When you're always doing something to fix yourself, you never accept that maybe you're not broken. The unconscious mind has been trying to tell you this for years, through the patterns that keep repeating, through the relationships that keep failing, through the goals you set but never achieve. It's been trying to get your attention to make you stop and listen. But you've been too busy doing to hear what it's saying. What if your unconscious has been sabotaging your efforts not to hurt you, but to help you? What if every failure has been a redirection? What if every setback has been an invitation to reconsider who you're trying to become? What if the life you think you want isn't the life you actually need? This is the question that emerges in stillness, and it's the question that changes everything. Because when you stop doing what you think you should do and start listening to what you actually want to do, when you stop trying to become who you think you should be and start accepting who you actually are, when you stop fighting your unconscious patterns and start understanding what they're trying to protect, everything shifts. The resistance disappears, the struggle ends, the constant feeling that you're swimming upstream dissolves.
Not because you've given up, but because you've finally aligned with your true nature instead of fighting against it. Jung called this alignment the transcendent function. It's what happens when your conscious mind finally stops fighting your unconscious mind and starts collaborating with it instead. But this collaboration requires something that our culture has forgotten how to do. It requires you to trust that your psyche knows what it's doing, that your unconscious has wisdom, that doing nothing can be more productive than doing everything. Most people never learn this trust because they never create the conditions for it to develop. They never sit still long enough to hear their inner wisdom. They never stop moving long enough to feel their natural rhythm. They never do nothing long enough to experience the intelligence of non-action. But when you finally do, when you finally surrender the illusion of control and allow your psyche to guide you, you discover something that changes how you see everything. You realize that you haven't been lazy or unmotivated or stuck. You've been waiting for the right moment, the right opportunity, the right conditions, and your unconscious has been protecting you from moving too early, from forcing something that wasn't ready to be born. The thing you've been trying so hard to make happen has been trying to happen naturally, but it needed time. It needed space. It needed you to stop interfering with its organic unfolding. This is why doing nothing isn't passive. It's the most active thing you can do, because it requires you to trust a process that you can't see, to have faith in an intelligence that you can't control, to surrender to a wisdom that you can't understand. And in that surrender, in that trust, in that willingness to do absolutely nothing, everything you've been trying to force begins to fall into place on its own. But first, you have to be willing to let go of who you think you are and allow yourself to become who you actually are. You have to be willing to stop doing what you think you should do and start being who you're meant to be. You have to be willing to stop doing what you think you should do and start being who you're meant to be. But what happens when you finally make that choice? What happens when you finally stop running from yourself and stand completely still? The first thing you notice is the silence. Not the absence of sound, but the presence of peace. For the first time in years, maybe decades, the war inside your head stops. The constant chatter about what you should be doing, who you should become, how you should fix yourself, finally quiets down. And in that silence, you hear something you haven't heard in so long, you'd forgotten it existed. Your own voice. Not the voice that's been programmed by society, by your family, by your fears. Your actual voice. The one that's been waiting patiently underneath all the noise. This voice doesn't sound like what you expected. It doesn't give you a to-do list. It doesn't tell you to hustle harder or optimize better. Instead, it tells you something revolutionary. You're already enough, not enough to stop growing, not enough to stop changing, but enough to stop fighting, enough to stop proving, enough to stop running from who you are in pursuit of who you think you should be. This realization hits you like lightning. All these years, you've been trying to earn something you already possessed. You've been seeking approval from others for a worth that was never in question. You've been fighting to become someone you already were underneath all the masks. Jung understood that this moment of recognition is the turning point of human existence.
He called it the integration of opposites. The moment when you stop seeing parts of yourself as enemies and start seeing them as allies, the anger you've been suppressing, it becomes your boundary-setting superpower. The laziness you've been fighting, it becomes your wisdom about what truly matters. The selfishness you've been ashamed of, it becomes your ability to care for yourself so you can genuinely care for others. Nothing about you changes, but everything about how you see yourself transforms. You realize that you haven't been broken. You've been fragmented. You haven't been weak. You've been at war with your own strength. You haven't been lost. You've been looking for yourself in all the wrong places. And now in the stillness, you find yourself exactly where you left yourself, waiting, patient, whole. But this wholeness doesn't look like perfection. It looks like integration. You're still angry sometimes, but now your anger serves you instead of controlling you. You're still sad sometimes, but now your sadness connects you to your humanity instead of isolating you from it. You're still afraid sometimes, but now your fear informs you instead of paralyzing you.
You become what Jung called individuated, not perfect, but complete, not flawless, but authentic, not without problems, but no longer at war with the problems you have. This is when the real magic begins. When you stop fighting yourself, you stop attracting fights with others. When you stop rejecting parts of yourself, you stop rejecting opportunities that could transform your life. When you stop running from your truth starts running toward you in the form of synchronicities, coincidences, and what Jung called meaningful encounters. Situations that have been stuck for years suddenly resolve themselves. Relationships that seemed impossible suddenly heal. Opportunities that felt out of reach suddenly present themselves. Not because you're doing more, but because you're resisting less. You begin to understand what the ancient philosophers meant when they spoke of wu-wei, the action of non-action, the power of non-resistance, the strength that comes from alignment rather than force. When you align with your true nature instead of fighting against it, life stops feeling like a struggle and starts feeling like a dance. You still move, but now you move with the rhythm of your authentic self instead of against it. Ask yourself, what would your life look like if you stopped swimming upstream? What would happen if you trusted that the current of your life knows where it's going? What would change if you stopped forcing and started flowing? Most people never find out because they're too terrified to let go of control. But Jung discovered that control is an illusion anyway. The unconscious mind is already running the show. The only choice you have is whether to collaborate with it or fight against it. When you finally choose collaboration over conflict, when you finally choose integration over rejection, when you finally choose acceptance over resistance, everything you've been trying to make happen through force begins to happen through grace. But this grace doesn't come from outside you. It comes from inside you. It's the natural result of no longer being at war with yourself. When your conscious and unconscious minds finally align, when your shadow and your light finally integrate, when your authentic self finally emerges from behind all the masks, you become what you were always meant to be, a whole human being. And whole human beings don't need to prove their worth. They don't need to chase external validation. They don't need to constantly do something to feel valuable, because their value comes from their being, not their doing. This is the ultimate freedom. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be whoever you are. Not the freedom from responsibility, but the freedom from the false responsibilities you've been carrying that were never yours to begin with. You realize that you don't have to save everyone. You don't have to fix everything. You don't have to be perfect for everyone. You just have to be authentic to yourself. And when you're authentic to yourself, you give others permission to be authentic to themselves.
Your integration becomes an invitation for others to integrate. Your wholeness becomes a catalyst for others to find their wholeness. This is how doing nothing changes everything, not just for you but for everyone around you. When you stop trying to be what others need you to be and start being who you actually are, you attract people who appreciate you for who you actually are. When you stop performing your worth and start embodying your worth, you create space for others to do the same. The relationships in your life transform, the superficial connections fall away, and deeper connections emerge. People who were drawn to your mask lose interest, and people who are drawn to your authenticity appear. Your work transforms. Instead of forcing yourself to do things that drain you, you find yourself naturally gravitating toward things that energize you. Not because you've become selfish, but because you've become aligned. Your entire life reorganizes itself around your truth, instead of around your fears. And this reorganization happens naturally, organically, without you having to plan it, or force it, or make it happen. You simply become yourself, and everything else falls into place. But becoming yourself requires you to let go of who you thought you were supposed to be. It requires you to disappoint some people. It requires you to say no to things you've been saying yes to out of obligation. It requires you to honor your needs, even when others don't understand them. This is the price of freedom. And it's a price most people are unwilling to pay because they're more afraid of disappointing others than they are of disappointing themselves.
But Jung understood something that changes this equation entirely. When you disappoint others to honor yourself, you inspire them to honor themselves. When you choose authenticity over approval, you give others permission to make the same choice. The people who truly love you will celebrate your authenticity, even if it's inconvenient for them. The people who don't celebrate your authenticity don't truly love you anyway. They love the version of you that serves their needs. And you don't need to be loved for who you're not. You need to be loved for who you are. This is what integration teaches you, that love based on performance isn't love at all. It's a transaction. And transactions leave everyone empty because no one is receiving what they actually need. What you actually need is to be seen. Not the polished version of yourself, but the complete version. The version that includes your light and your shadow, your strength and your vulnerability, your wisdom and your confusion. When you finally allow yourself to be seen completely, when you finally stop hiding parts of yourself out of fear, when you finally present your whole self to the world, something miraculous happens. You realize that the parts of yourself you've been most ashamed of are often the parts that others connect with most strongly. Your vulnerability becomes your relatability. Your struggles become your credibility. Your humanity becomes your superpower. But you can't access this power while you're still trying to be superhuman. You can only access it when you finally accept that being human is enough. Being human means making mistakes. Being human means having bad days. Being human means not having all the answers. Being human means being perfectly imperfect. And when you finally embrace your humanity, instead of fighting against it, you discover that you don't need to be superhuman to have a super life. You just need to be authentically human. This is the final lesson that doing nothing teaches you, that you don't need to become someone else to have the life you want. You need to become more yourself, and becoming more yourself doesn't require doing more. It requires being more honest, being more authentic, being more present, being more accepting of who you are right now, in this moment exactly as you are. When you can sit with yourself without needing to change anything, when you can be with yourself without needing to improve anything, when you can love yourself
without needing to fix anything. You found the secret that Jung spent his life teaching. The secret is that you were never broken in the first place. You were just human. And being human is not a problem to be solved. It's a gift to be celebrated. So stop doing, start being, stop forcing, start flowing, stop fighting, start accepting. Allow yourself to do nothing and watch how everything falls into place. Not because the world changes, but because you stop fighting the world. Not because life becomes perfect, but because you become perfectly okay with life being imperfect. Not because you finally get what you want, but because you finally want what you have. This is integration. This is individuation. This is the transformation that happens when you finally stop running from yourself and start running toward yourself. And it all begins with the courage to do absolutely nothing at all. Right now, as you're listening to these words, you have a choice. You can go back to the endless cycle of doing, striving, forcing, and fighting, or you can finally stop. You can finally be still. You can finally listen to the voice that's been waiting your entire life to be heard. Your authentic self is calling. It's time to answer. Set yourself free, do nothing, and watch as everything you've been trying to force into existence finally falls into place on its own. The only thing standing between you and the life you're meant to live is the belief that you need to do something to earn it. You don't. You already are everything you need to be. Now stop trying to become it and start being it. Your transformation isn't waiting for you to do something. It's waiting for you to do nothing. Are you ready to finally stop and let everything fall into place?